"I suppose you will be getting away pretty soon, now full term is over, Professor," said a person not in the story to the Professor of Ontography, soon after they had sat down next to each other at a feast in the hospitable hall of St. James's College. The Professor was young, neat, and precise in speech. "Yes," he said, "my friends have been making me take up golf this term, and I mean to go to the East Coast, in point of fact to Burnstow, I dare say you know it, for a week or 10 days, to improve my game. I hope to get off tomorrow." "Oh, Parkins," said his neighbour on the other side, "if you're going to Burnstow, I wish you would look at the site of the Templars' preceptory, and let me know if you think it would be any good to have a dig there in the summer." It was, as you might suppose, a person of antiquarian pursuits who said this, but since he merely appears in this prologue, there is no need to give his entitlements. "Certainly," said Parkins. "The Professor, if you will describe to me whereabouts the site is, I'll do my best to give you an idea of the lie of the land when I get back. Or I could write to you about it, if you would tell me where you were likely to be." "No, don't trouble to do that, thanks. It's only that I'm thinking of taking my family in that direction in the long. It occurred to me that, as very few of the English preceptories have ever been properly planned, I might have an opportunity of doing something useful on off-days." The Professor rather sniffed at the idea that planning out a preceptory could be described as useful. His neighbour continued, "The site, I doubt if there is anything showing above ground, must be quite close to the beach now. The seas encroach tremendously, as you know, all along that bit of coast. I should think from the map that it must be about 3/4 of a mile from the Globe Inn at the north end of town." "Where are you going to stay?" "Well, at the Globe Inn, as a matter of fact," said Parkins. "I've engaged a room there. Couldn't get in anywhere else. Most of the lodging houses are shut up in winter, it seems, and as it is, they tell me that the only room of any size I can have is really a double-bedded one, and that they haven't got a corner in which to store the other bed, and so on. But I must have a fairly large room, for I'm taking some books down, and I mean to do a bit of work. And though I don't quite fancy having an empty bed, not to speak of two, in what I may call, for the time being, my study, I suppose I can manage to rough it for the short time I shall be there." "Do you call having an extra bed in your room roughing it, Parkins?" said a bluff person opposite. "Look here, I shall come down and occupy it for a bit. It'll be company for you." The Professor quivered, but managed to laugh in a courteous manner. "By all means, Rogers. There's nothing I should like better, but I'm afraid you would find it rather dull. You don't play golf, do you?" "No, thank heaven," said rude Mr. Rogers. "Well, you see, when I'm not writing, I shall most likely be out on the links, and that, as I say, would be rather dull for you, I'm afraid." "Oh, I don't know. There's certain to be somebody I know in the place, but of course, if you don't want me, speak the word, Parkins, I shan't be offended. Truth, as you always tell us, is never offensive." Parkins was, indeed, scrupulously polite and strictly truthful. It is to be feared that Mr. Rogers sometimes practised upon his knowledge of these characteristics. In Parkins' breast there was a conflict now raging, for which a moment or two did not allow him to answer. That interval being over, he said, "Well, if you want the exact truth, Rogers, I was considering whether the room I speak of would really be large enough to accommodate us both comfortably, and also whether— mind, I shouldn't have said this if you hadn't pressed me— you would not constitute something in the nature of a hindrance to my work." Rogers laughed loudly. "Well done, Parkins," he said. "It's all right. I promise not to interrupt your work. Don't you disturb yourself about that. No, I won't come if you don't want me. But I thought I should do so nicely to keep the ghosts off." Here he might have been seen to wink and nudge his next neighbour. Parkins might also have been seen to become pink. "I beg pardon, Parkins," Rogers continued. "I oughtn't have said that. I forgot you didn't like levity on these topics." "Well," Parkins said, "as you have mentioned the matter, I freely own that I do not like careless talk about what you call ghosts. A man in my position," he went on, raising his voice a little, "cannot, I find, be too careful about appearing to sanction the current beliefs on such subjects, as you know, Rogers, or as you ought to know, for I think I have never concealed my views." "No, you have certainly not, old man," put in Rogers. "I hold that any semblance, any appearance of concession to the view that such things might exist is equivalent to a renunciation of all that I hold most sacred, but I'm afraid I have not succeeded in securing your attention." "Your undivided attention," was what Dr. Blimber actually said. Rogers interrupted with every appearance of an earnest desire for accuracy. "But I beg your pardon, Parkins, I'm stopping you." "No, not at all," said Parkins. "I don't remember Blimber. Perhaps he was before my time, but I needn't go on. I'm sure you know what I mean." Yes, said Rogers rather hastily. "Just so. We'll go into it fully at Burnstow, or somewhere." In repeating the above dialogue, I've tried to give the impression which it made on me, that Parkins was something of an old woman, rather hen-like perhaps in his little ways, totally destitute, alas, of the sense of humour, but at the same time dauntless and sincere in his convictions, and a man deserving of the greatest respect. Whether or not the reader has gathered so much, well, that was the character which Parkins had. On the following day, Parkins did, as he hoped, succeed in getting away from his college, and in arriving at Burnstow, he was made welcome at the Globe Inn, was safely installed in the large double-bedded room of which we have heard, and was able, before retiring, to arrange his materials for work in apple-pie order upon a commodious table which occupied the outer end of the room, and was surrounded on 3 sides by windows looking out seaward. That is to say, the central window looked straight out to the sea, and those on the left and right commanded prospects along the shore to the north and south, respectively. On the south, you saw the village of Burnstow. On the north, no houses to be seen, but only the beach and the low cliff backing it. Immediately in front was a strip, not considerable, of rough grass, dotted with old anchors, capstans, and so forth, then a broad path, then the beach. Whatever may have been the original distance between the Globe Inn and the sea, not more than 60 yards now separated them. The rest of the population of the inn was, of course, a golfing one, and included few elements that called for a special description. The most conspicuous figure was perhaps that of an ancient military secretary of a London club, and possessed of a voice of incredible strength, and of views of a pronouncedly Protestant type. These were apt to find utterance after his attendance upon the ministrations of the vicar, an estimable man with inclinations towards The rest of the population of the inn was, of course, a golfing one, and included few elements that called for a special description. The most conspicuous figure was perhaps that of an ancient military secretary of a London club, and possessed of a voice of incredible strength, and of views of a pronounced Protestant type. These were apt to find utterance after his attendance upon the ministrations of the vicar, an estimable man with inclinations towards a picturesque ritual, which he gallantly kept down as far as he could out of deference to East Anglian tradition. Professor Parkins, one of whose principal characteristics was pluck, spent the greater part of the day following his arrival at Burnstow in what he called improving his game. In company with this Colonel Wilson, and during the afternoon, whether the process of improvement were to blame or not, I am not sure, the Colonel's demeanour assumed a colouring so lurid that even Parkins jibbed at the thought of walking home with him from the links. He determined, After a short and furtive look at that bristling moustache and those incarnadine features, that it would be wiser to allow the influences of tea and tobacco to do what they could with the colonel before the dinner hour should render a meeting inevitable. "I might walk home tonight along the beach," he reflected. "Yes, and take a look. There will be light enough for that at the ruins of which Disney was talking. I don't exactly know where they are, by the way, but I expect I can hardly help stumbling on them." Then he accomplished, I may say, in the most literal sense, for in picking his way from the links to the shingled beach, his foot caught, partly in a gorse root and partly in a biggish stone, and over he went. When he got up and surveyed his surroundings, he found himself in a patch of somewhat broken ground covered with small depressions and mounds. These latter, when he came to examine them, proved to be simply masses of flints, embedded in mortar and grown over with turf. He must, he quite rightly concluded, be on the site of the preceptory he had promised to look at. It seemed not unlikely to reward the spade of the explorer. Enough of the foundations was probably left, at no great depth, to throw a good deal of light upon the general plan. He remembered vaguely that the Templars, to whom this site had belonged, were in the habit of building round churches. And he thought a particular series of the humps or mounds near him did appear to be arranged in something of a circular form. Few people can resist the temptation to try a little amateur research in a department quite outside their own, if only for the satisfaction of showing how successful they would have been had they only taken it up seriously. Our professor, however, if he felt something of this mean desire, was also truly anxious to oblige Mr. Disney. So he paced, with care, the circular area he had noticed, and wrote down its rough dimensions in his pocket-book. Then he proceeded to examine an oblong eminence which lay east of the centre of the circle, and seemed to his thinking likely to be the base of a platform or altar. At one end of it, the northern, a patch of the turf was gone, removed by some boy or other creature. It might, he thought, be as well to probe the soil here for evidences of masonry, and he took out his knife and began scraping away the earth. And now followed another little discovery. A portion of soil fell inward as he scraped and disclosed a small cavity. He lighted one match after another to help him see of what nature the hole was, but the wind was too strong for them all. By tapping and scratching the sides with his knife, however, he was able to make out that it must be an artificial hole in masonry. It was rectangular, and the sides, top and bottom, if not actually plastered, were smooth and regular. Of course it was empty. No. As he withdrew the knife, he heard a metallic clink, and when he introduced his hand, it met with a cylindrical object lying on the floor of the hole. Naturally enough, he picked it up, and when he brought it into the light, now fast fading, he could see that it too was of man's making. A metal tube, about 4 inches long, and evidently of some considerable age. By the time Parkins had made sure there was nothing else in this odd receptacle, it was too late and too dark for him to think of undertaking any further search. What he had done had proved so unexpectedly interesting that he determined to sacrifice a little more of the daylight on the morrow to archaeology. The object which he now had safe in his pocket was bound to be of some slight value at least, he felt sure. Bleak and solemn was the view on which he took a last look before starting homeward. A faint yellow light in the west showed the links, on which a few figures moving towards the clubhouse were still visible. The squat Martello Tower, the lights of Aldsea village, the pale ribbon of sands intersected at intervals by black wooden groins, the dim and murmuring sea. He quickly rattled and clashed through the shingle and gained the sand, upon which, but for the groins, which had to be got over every few yards, the going was both good and quiet. One last look behind, to measure the distance he had made, showed him a prospect of company on his walk, in the shape of a rather indistinct personage, who seemed to be making great efforts to catch up with him, but made little, if any, progress. I mean that there was an appearance of running about his movements, but that the distance between him and Parkins did not seem materially to lessen. It would be absurd to wait until he came up, but for all that, company, he began to think, would really be very welcome on that lonely shore. If only you could choose your companion. What should I do now, he thought. If I looked back and caught sight of a black figure sharply defined against the yellow sky, and saw that it had horns and wings, I wonder whether I should stand or run for it. Luckily, the gentleman behind is not of that kind, and he seems to be as far off now as when I saw him first. Well, at this rate, he won't get his dinner as soon as I shall, and dear me, it's within a quarter of an hour of the time now. I must run. Parkins had, in fact, very little time for dressing. When he met the Colonel at dinner, peace, or as much of her as that gentleman could manage, reigned once more in the military bosom, nor was she put to flight in the hours of bridge that followed dinner, for Parkins was a more than respectable player. When, therefore, he retired towards 12 o'clock, he felt that he had spent his evening in quite a satisfactory way, and that, even for so long as a fortnight or 3 weeks, life at the Globe would be supportable under similar conditions, especially if I go on improving my game. As he went along the passage, he met the boots of the Globe, who stopped and said, "Beg pardon, sir, but as I was brushing your coat just now, there was something fell out of the pocket. I put it on your chest of drawers. You'll find it on your chest of drawers, sir. Yes. Good night, sir." The speech served to remind Parkins of his discovery that afternoon. It was with some curiosity that he turned over by the light of his candles. It was of bronze, he now saw, and was shaped very much after the manner of a modern dog whistle. In fact, it was actually no more nor less than a whistle. He put it to his lips, but it was quite full of a fine caked-up sand or earth, which would not yield to knocking, but must be loosened with a knife. Tidy in his habits, Parkins cleared out the earth onto a piece of paper, and took the latter to the window to empty it out. The night was clear and bright, as he saw when he opened the casement, and as he stopped for an instant to look at the sea, and note a belated wanderer, this man was stationed on the shore in front of the inn. And he shut the window, a little surprised at the late hours people kept at Burnstow, and he took his whistle to the light again. Why, surely there were marks on it. Not merely marks, but letters. A little rubbing rendered the deeply cut inscription quite legible. There were legends both on the front and on the back of the whistle. The one read thus: FLA FURBIS FLE. And the other, Quis est iste qui unit. I ought to be able to make it out, but I suppose I am a little rusty in my Latin. When I come to think of it, I don't believe I even know the word for a whistle. The long one in Latin does seem to be simple enough. It ought to mean, "Who is this? Who is coming?" Well, the best way to find out is evidently to whistle for him. He blew tentatively and stopped suddenly, startled, and yet pleased at the note he had elicited. It had a quality of infinite distance in it, and soft as it was, he somehow felt it must be audible miles around. It was a sound, too, that seemed to have the power of forming pictures in the brain. He saw quite clearly for a moment a vision of a wide, dark expanse at night, with a fresh wind blowing, and in the midst a lonely figure. How employed, he could not tell. Perhaps he would have seen more had not the picture been broken by the sudden surge of a gust of wind against his casement. The sound of the whistle had so fascinated him that he could not help to try it once more, this time more boldly. The note was little, if at all, louder than before, and repetition broke the illusion. No picture followed, as he had half hoped it might. What is this? Goodness! What force the wind can get up in a few minutes! What a tremendous gust! There! I knew that window fastening was no use. Ah, I thought so. Both candles out. It's enough to tear the room to pieces. The first thing was to get the window shut. While you might count 20, Parkins was struggling with the small casement and felt almost as if he were pushing back a sturdy burglar, so strong was the pressure. And then it slackened all at once, and the window banged to and latched itself. Now to relight the candles and see what damage, if any, had been done. No, nothing seemed amiss. No glass was even broken in the casement. But the noise had evidently roused at least one member of the household. The Colonel was to be heard stomping in his stockinged feet on the floor above and growling. Quickly as it had risen, the wind did not fall at once. On it went, moaning and rushing past the house, at times rising to a cry so desolate that, as Parkins said, it might have made fanciful people feel quite uncomfortable. Even in the unimaginative, he thought after a quarter of an hour, might be happier without it. Whether it was the wind or the excitement of golf or the researches in the preceptory that kept Parkins awake, he was not sure. Awake he remained, in any case, long enough to fancy that he was the victim of all manner of fatal disorders. He would lie counting the beats of his heart, convinced that it was going to stop working every moment, and would entertain grave suspicions of his lungs, his brain, his liver. Suspicions which he was sure would be dispelled by the return of daylight, but which until then refused to be put aside. He found a little vicarious comfort in the idea that someone else was in the same boat. A near neighbour, in the darkness it was not easy to tell his direction, was tossing and turning in his bed too. The next stage was that Parkins shut his eyes and determined to give sleep every chance. Here again, over-excitement asserted itself in another form, that of making pictures. Pictures do come to the closed eyes of one trying to sleep, and are often so little to his taste that he must open his eyes and disperse them. Parkins' experience on this occasion was a very distressing one. He found that the picture which presented itself to him was continuous. When he opened his eyes, of course, it went, but when he shut them once more, it framed itself afresh, and acted itself out again, neither quicker nor slower than before. What he saw was this: a long stretch of shore, shingle-edged by sand and intersected at short intervals with black groins running down to the water, a scene so like that of his afternoon's walk that in the absence of any landmark it could not be distinguished therefrom. The light was obscure, conveying an impression of gathering storm, late winter evening, and slight cold wane. On this bleak stage, at first no actor was visible. Then, in the distance, a bobbing black object appeared. A moment more, and it was a man, running, clambering over the groins, and every few seconds looking eagerly back. The nearer he came, the more obvious it was that he was not only anxious, but even terribly frightened. Though his face was not to be distinguished, he was, moreover, almost at the end of his strength. On he came. Each successive obstacle seemed to cause him more difficulty than the last. Will he get over this next one? Thought Parkins. It seems a little higher than the others. Yes, half climbing, half throwing himself, he did get over, and fell all in a heap on the other side. There, as if really unable to get up again, he remained crouching under the groin, looking up in an attitude of painful anxiety. So far, no cause whatever for the fear of the runner had been shown, but now there began to be seen, far up the shore, a little flicker of something light-coloured moving to and fro with great swiftness and irregularity. Rapidly growing larger, it too declared itself as a figure in pale, fluttering draperies, ill-defined. There was something about its motions which made Parkins very unwilling to see it at close quarters. It would stop, raise arms, bow itself towards the sand, then run stooping across the beach to the water edge and back again. And then, rising upright, once more continue its course forward at a speed that was startling and terrifying. The moment came when the pursuer was hovering about from left to right, only a few yards beyond the groin where the runner lay in hiding. After 2 or 3 ineffectual castings hither and thither, it came to a stop, stood upright, with arms raised high, and then darted straight towards the groin. It was at this point that Parkins always failed in his resolution to keep his eyes shut. With many misgivings as to incipient failure of eyesight, overworked brain, excessive smoking, and so on, he finally resigned himself to light his candle, get out a book, and pass the night waking rather than be tormented by this persistent panorama, which he saw clearly enough could only be a morbid reflection of his walk and his thoughts on that very day. The scraping of match on box and the glare of light must have startled some creatures of the night, which he heard scurry across the floor from the side of his bed with much rustling, rats or what not. Dear, dear, the match is out. The second one burnt better, and a candle and book were duly procured, over which Parkins pored till sleep of a wholesome kind came upon him, and that in no long space. For about the first time in his orderly and prudent life, he forgot to blow out the candle. And when he was called next morning at 8, there was still a flicker in the socket and a sad mess of guttered grease on the top of the little table. At breakfast he was in his room, putting the finishing touches to his golfing costume. Fortune had again allotted the Colonel to him for a partner, when one of the maids came in. "Oh, if you please," she said, "would you like any extra blankets on your bed, sir?" "Ah, thank you," said Parkins. "Yes, I think I should like one. It seems likely to turn rather colder." In a very short time the maid was back with the blanket. "Oh, which bed should I put it on, sir?" Why, that one, the one he slept in last night," pointing to it. "Oh, yes, I beg your pardon, sir, but you seem to have tried both of them. Well, leastways, we had to make 'em both up this morning." "Really? How very absurd. I certainly never touched the other, except to lay some things on it. Did it actually seem to have been slept in?" "Oh, yes, sir. Why, all the things was crumpled and throwed about always. If you'll excuse me, sir. Quite as if anyone hadn't passed but a very poor night, sir." Dear me, well, I may have disordered it more than I thought when I unpacked my things. I'm very sorry to have given you the extra trouble, I'm sure. I expect a friend of mine soon, by the way. A gentleman from Cambridge to come and occupy it for a night or two. That will be all right, I suppose, won't it? Oh, yes, to be sure, sir. Thank you. It's no trouble, I'm sure, said the maid, and departed. Parkins set forth with a stern determination to improve his game. I'm glad to report that he succeeded so far in this enterprise that the colonel, who had been rather repining at the prospect of a second day's play in his company, became quite chatty as the morning advanced, and his voice boomed over the flats, as certain also of our minor poets have said, like some great Hordern in a minster tower. Extraordinary wind that we had last night, he said. In my old home we should have said that someone had been whistling for it. Should you indeed? Said Parkins. Well, is there a superstition of that kind currently still in your part of the country? Well, I don't know about superstition, said the colonel. They believe in it all over Denmark and Norway, as well as on the Yorkshire coast. My experience is, mind you, there's generally something at the bottom of what these country folk hold to and have held on to for generations. But it's your drive. When the conversation was resumed, Parkins said, with a slight hesitancy, Apropos of what you were saying just now, Colonel, I think I ought to tell you that my own views on such subjects are very strong. I am, in fact, a convinced disbeliever in what is called the supernatural. What? You mean you don't believe in second sight or ghosts or anything of that kind? In nothing whatever of that kind. Well, it appears to me at that rate, sir, you must be little better than a Sadducee. Parkins was on the point of answering that, in his opinion, the Sadducees were the most sensible persons he had ever read of in the Old Testament, but feeling some doubt as to whether much mention of them was to be found in that work, he preferred to laugh the accusation off. Perhaps I am, Parkins said, but here, give me my clique, boy. Excuse me one moment, Colonel. A short interval. Now, as to whistling for the wind, let me give you my theory about it. The laws which govern winds are not really at all perfectly known. To fisher folk and such, of course, not known at all. A man or woman of eccentric habits, perhaps, or a stranger is seen repeatedly on the beach at some unusual hour and is heard whistling. Soon afterwards, a violent wind rises. A man who could have read the sky perfectly could have foretold that it would. The simple people of a fishing village have no barometers, only a few rough rules for prophesying weather. What more natural than the eccentric personage I postulated should be regarded as having raised the wind, or that he, or she, could clutch eagerly at the reputation of being able to do so? Now take last night's wind. As it happens, I myself was whistling. I blew a whistle twice, and the wind seemed to come absolutely in to answer my call. If anyone had seen me, well, whistling, were you? He said. What sort of whistle did you use? Play this stroke first. Interval. Well, about that whistle you were asking, Colonel, it's rather a curious one. I have it in my... No, I've left it in my room. As a matter of fact, I found it yesterday. And then Parkins narrated the manner of his discovery of the whistle, upon hearing which the Colonel grunted and opined that, in Parkinson's place, he should himself be careful about using a thing that had belonged to a set of papists, of whom, speaking generally, it might be affirmed that you never know what they might or might not have been up to. From this topic he diverged to the enormities of the vicar, who had given notice on the previous Sunday that Friday would be the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle, and that there would be service at 11 o'clock in the church. This and other similar proceedings constituted, in the Colonel's view, a strong presumption that the vicar was a concealed papist, if not a Jesuit, and Parkins, who could not very readily follow the Colonel into this region, did not disagree with him. In fact, they got on so well together in the morning that there was no talk on either side of their separating after lunch. Both continued to play well during the afternoon, or at least well enough to make them forget everything else until the light began to fall them in the evening. Not until then did Parkins remember that he had meant to do some more investigating at the preceptory, but it was of no great importance, he reflected. One day was as good as another. He might as well go home with the colonel. As they turned the corner of the house, the colonel was almost knocked down by a boy who rushed into him at the very top of his speed, and then, instead of running away, remained hanging on to him and panting. Inquiries were useless at first. When the boy got his breath, he began to howl and still clung to the colonel's legs. He was at last detached, but continued to howl. What in the world is the matter with you? What have you been up to? What have you seen? Said the two men. Oh, I've seen it with me, out the window, wailed the boy, and I don't like it. What window? Said the irritated colonel. Come, pull yourself together, my boy. The front window it was. At the hotel, said the boy. At this point Parkins was in favour of sending the boy home, but the colonel refused. He wanted to get to the bottom of it, he said. It was most dangerous to give a boy such a fright as this one had had, and if it turned out that the people had been playing jokes, they should suffer for it in some way. And by a series of questions, he made out this story. The boy had been playing about on the grass in front of the Globe Inn with some others. Then they had gone home to their teas, and he was just going when it happened to look upon at the front window and see it with him. It seemed to be a figure of some sort, in white as far as he knew. He couldn't see its face. But it waved at him. And it wasn't a right thing, well, not to say not a right person. Was there light in the room? No. He didn't think to look if there was light. Which was the window? Was it the top one or the second one? The second one it was. It was the big window, which had two small ones at the sides. Very well now, my boy, said the colonel, after a few more questions. You run away home now. I expect it was some person trying to give you a start. Another time, like a brave English boy, you just throw a stone. Well, not that exactly, but you go and speak to the waiter or to Mr. Simpson, the landlord, and yes, say that I advised you to do so. The boy's face expressed some of the doubt he felt as to the likelihood of Mr. Simpson's lending a favourable ear to his complaint, but the colonel did not appear to perceive this and went on. And here's a sixpence. No, I see it's a shilling, and you be off home. Don't think any more about it. The youth hurried off with agitated thanks, and the colonel and Parkins went round to the front of the Globe and continued. There was only one window answering to the description that they had been hearing. Well, that's curious, said Parkins. It's evidently my window the lad was talking about. Will you come up for a moment, Colonel Wilson? We ought to be able to see if anyone has been taking liberties in my room. They were soon in the passage, and Parkins made as if to open the door. Then he stopped and felt in his pockets. This is more serious than I thought, was his next remark. I remember now that before I started this morning I locked the door. It is locked now, and what is more to say, here is the key. And he held it up. Now, if the servants are in the habit of going into one's room during the day when one is away, I can only say that, well, I don't approve of it at all. Conscious of a somewhat weak climax, he busied himself in opening the door, which was indeed locked, and in lighting candles. No, he said, nothing seems disturbed, except your bed, put in the Colonel. "Excuse me, that isn't my bed," said Parkins. "I don't use that one, but it does look as if someone has been playing tricks with it." It certainly did. The clothes were bundled up and twisted together in a most tortuous confusion, Parkins pondered. "And that must be it," he said at last. I disordered the clothes last night in unpacking, and they haven't made it since. Perhaps they came in to make it, and the boy saw them through the window, and they were called away and locked the door after them. Yes, I think that must be it." "Well, ring and ask," said the Colonel, and this appealed to Parkins as practical. The maid appeared, and to make a long story short, deposed that she had made the bed in the morning when the gentleman was in the room, and hadn't been there since. And no, she hadn't the other key. Mr. Simpson, he kept the keys. He'd be able to tell the gentleman if anyone had been up. This was a puzzle. Investigation showed that nothing of value had been taken, and Parkins remembered the disposition of the small objects on the tables and so forth well enough to be pretty sure that no pranks had been played with them. Mr. and Mrs. Simpson, furthermore, agreed that neither of them had given the duplicate key of the room to any person whatever during the day. Nor could Parkins, fair-minded man as he was, detect anything in the demeanour of master, mistress, or maid that indicated guilt. He was much more inclined to think that the boy had been imposing on the Colonel. The latter was unwontedly silent and pensive at dinner, and throughout the evening, when he bade good night to Parkins, he murmured in a gruff undertone, "You know where I am, if you want me during the night." "Why, yes, thank you, Colonel Wilson. I think I do, but there isn't much prospect of my disturbing you, I hope. By the way," he added, "did I show you that old whistle I spoke of? I think not. Well, here it is." The Colonel turned it over in the light of the candle. "Can you make anything of the inscription?" asked Parkins as he took it back. "No, not in this light. What do you mean to do with it?" "Well, when I get back to Cambridge, I shall submit it to some of the archaeologists there and see what they think of it. And very likely, if they consider it worth having, I may present it to one of the museums." Well, you may be right. All I know is that if it were mine, I should chuck it straight into the sea. It's no use talking, I'm well aware, but I expect that with you it's a case of live and learn. I hope so, I'm sure, and I wish you a good night." He turned away, leaving Parkins in act to speak at the bottom of the stair, and soon each was in his own bedroom. By some unfortunate accident, there were neither blinds nor curtains to the windows of the Professor's room. The previous night he had thought little of this, but tonight there seemed to be every prospect of a bright moon rising to shine directly on his bed, and probably wake him later on. When he noticed this, he was a good deal annoyed, but with an ingenuity which I can only envy, he succeeded in rigging up, with the help of a railway rug, some safety pins, and a stick and umbrella, a screen which, if it only held together, would completely keep the moonlight off his bed. And shortly afterwards, he was comfortably in that bed. When he had read a solid work long enough to produce a decided wish for sleep, he cast a drowsy glance around the room, blew out the candle, and fell back upon the pillow. He must have slept soundly for an hour or more when a sudden clatter shook him up in a most unwelcome manner. In a moment he realized what had happened. His carefully constructed screen had given way, and a very bright, frosty moon was shining directly on his face. This was highly annoying. Could he possibly get up and reconstruct the screen, or could he manage to sleep if he did not? For some minutes he lay and pondered over the possibilities. Then he turned over sharply. With all his eyes open, lay breathlessly listening. There had been a movement, he was sure, in the empty bed on the opposite side of the room. Tomorrow he would have it moved, for there must be rats or something playing about in it. It was quiet now. No. The commotion began again. There was a rustling and shaking, surely more than any rat could cause. I can figure myself something of a professor's bewilderment and horror, for I have in a dream 30 years back seen the same thing happen, but the reader will hardly perhaps imagine how dreadful it was to him to see a figure suddenly sit up in what he had known was an empty bed. He was out of his bed in one bound, and he made a dash towards the window, where lay his only weapon, the stick with which he had propped his screen. This was, as it turned out, the worst thing he could have done, because the personage in the empty bed, with a sudden smooth motion, slipped from the bed and took up a position with outspread arms between the two beds and in front of the door. Parkins watched it in a horrid perplexity. Somehow the idea of getting past it and escaping through the door was intolerable to him. He could not have borne, he did not know why, to touch it. And as for its touching him, he would sooner dash himself through the window than have that happen. It stood for a moment in a band of dark shadow, and he had not seen what its face was like. Now it began to move in a stooping posture, and all at once the spectator realized with some horror and some relief that it must be blind, for it seemed to feel about it with its muffled arms in a groping and random fashion, turning half away from him. It became suddenly conscious of the bed he had just left, and darted towards it, and bent over, and felt the pillows in a way which made Parkins shudder, as if he had never in his life thought possible. In a very few moments it seemed to know that the bed was empty, and then moving forward into an area of light and facing the window, it showed for the first time what manner of thing it was. Parkins, who very much dislikes being questioned about it, did once describe something of it in my hearing, and I gathered that what he chiefly remembers about it is a horrible, an intensely horrible face of crumpled linen. What expression he read upon it he could not or would not tell, but that the fear of it went nigh to maddening him is certain. But he was not at leisure to watch it for long. With formidable quickness it moved into the middle of the room, and as it groped and waved, one corner of its drapery swept across Parkins's face. He could not, though he knew how perilous the sound was, he could not keep back a cry of disgust, and this gave the searcher an instant clue. It leapt towards him upon the instant, and the next moment he was halfway through the window backwards, uttering cry upon cry at the utmost pitch of his voice, and the linen face was thrust close into his own. At this, almost the last possible second, deliverance came, as you will have guessed. The colonel burst into the room, and was just in time to see the dreadful group at the window. When he reached the figures, only one was left. Parkins sank forward into the room in a faint, and before him on the floor lay a tumbled heap of bedclothes. Colonel Wilson asked no questions, but busied himself in keeping everyone else out of the room and in getting Parkins back to his bed, and himself, wrapped in a rug, occupied the other bed for the rest of the night. Early on the next day Rogers arrived, more welcome than he would have been a day before, and the three of them held a very long consultation in the professor's room. At the end of it, the colonel left the hotel door, carrying a small object between his finger and thumb, which he cast as far into the sea as a very brawny arm could send it. Later on, the smoke of a burning ascended from the back premises of the Globe. Exactly what explanation was patched up for the staff and visitors at the hotel, I must confess I do not recollect. The professor was somehow cleared of the ready suspicion of delirium tremens, and the hotel of the reputation of a troubled house. There is not much question as to what would have happened to Parkins if the colonel had not intervened when he did. He would either have fallen out of the window, or else lost his wits. But it is not so evident what more the creature that came in to answer the whistle could have done than frighten. There seemed to be absolutely nothing material about it, save the bedclothes of which it had made itself a body. The colonel, who remembered a not very dissimilar occurrence in India, was of the opinion that if Parkins had closed with it, it could really have done very little, and that its one power was that of fright. The whole thing, he said, confirmed his opinion of the Church of Rome. There is really nothing more to tell, but as you may imagine, the professor's views on certain points are less clear-cut than they used to be. His nerves, too, have suffered. He cannot now even see a surplice hanging on a door, quite unmoved, and the spectacle of a scarecrow in a field late on a winter afternoon has cost him more than one sleepless night.